This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss, co-host of PBS's Motor Week. He'll take your calls and comments now at 844-885-4677 or email him at radio@goss-garage.com. And now, Pat Goss.
Hey folks, I hate to tell you, but I think there may be more fake stories about cars than politics these days. Myths like buy a used car and all you're getting is someone else's problems. Now that's pure garbage. Now I don't know if that ever was true, but I do know it isn't true today. Sure, some used cars are dogs, but many late model used cars are cream puffs due to leasing. Lots of drivers lease their new cars to get a lower payment or tax advantage. The typical lease is 3 years and comes with very strict requirements for maintenance and appearance care. Now, when these cars are turned back in at the end of the lease, the great ones usually become certified pre-owned or CPO cars. CPO cars are generally good deals because they're thoroughly checked out and someone else has paid the big, or in many cases, huge initial depreciation hit, and that's done for you. Plus, CPOs have a warranty that may be better than the new car warranty, and you still save money on a 3-year-old luxury or near luxury CPO. 20 to 40% or more compared to new, and you can choose between paying less money or the same amount of money and step up to a higher level of car. Of course, always get a Carfax vehicle history report and have any car checked from bumper to bumper by a qualified technician before you buy. But do it right and you'll be driving a car where someone else paid your initial depreciation for you. Now that's smart. All right, folks. Hey, we are joined today by Mr. Rick Robinson of American High Performance in Lorton, Virginia. Rick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Pat.
What's been going on at American High Performance?
Well, we continue to have a lot of fun with American muscle cars. We talk about the typical muscle cars that we work on, the Mustangs, Camaros, Corvettes, the Dodge Hemys, all the time. But it's always fun to get something different in now and then to kind of liven things up. And recently, a customer brought us a 2013 Chevy Suburban. Now, you don't generally think of a 7,000-pound plus tank like that as a performance car.
For sure.
And certainly stock out of the factory, they're not that great. Although the newer ones certainly do much better than the earlier models. The new 6-liter motor that they've got in them has over 300 horsepower, and it'll actually push that thing to 60 miles an hour in about 8 seconds, which again
not bad
for a 7,000-pound plus vehicle, that's pretty good. But for car guys like us, that's never enough, right? And this gentleman wanted to get a little more giddy up and go out of it. So when we approach a job like that, particularly something in a heavy vehicle that's going to take a significant amount of horsepower gain to really improve its performance, supercharger or turbocharger is really the only way to go. Forced induction is the only way to go. Mm-hmm. We have to get more air in so that we can put more fuel in and make more power. And the most effective way to do that in any significant way is with forced induction. Just cram it in there. You're trying to raise the cylinder pressures, get more air in, get more bang out of every stroke. In this car, again, because of the weight, and we're trying to get this thing moving from fairly low speeds, you want a lot of low-end torque too. Race cars like a Shelby GT350R, for example, that will wind to 10,000 RPM, makes a lot of horsepower up at those high RPMs. It doesn't help you get off the line, though. You need that low-end grunt to get off the line. And there's nothing better out there to produce that than the root style or twin screw, as we call it today, superchargers. And Whipple is one of the best. And that's what we chose for this particular project, was a 2.9 liter Whipple supercharger.
Now, when you say 2.9 liter, that's the amount of air it displaces.
Yes.
At what interval?
Per revolution. So that's essentially the volume of the inside of the supercharger, and it's pushing that much air on every revolution. So again, at 5,000 RPM, it's pushing quite a bit of air.
Moving some air. That's a serious breeze going into the engine.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, one of the things that I get questions about when we're retrofitting a car, why supercharging as opposed to turbocharging?
That's been a long-standing debate, which is the better. Both of them are good. Both of them have their own characteristics. The supercharger, like I mentioned, can produce a lot of low-end torque, because the boost tends to come on faster, particularly in the twin screw style supercharger. They're producing boost all the time. As long as that thing's turning, that compressor is working and pushing air. Well, we've got a bypass valve open.
Okay. Rick, hold on just a minute. We have a little bit of a technical issue here. Let's take a break. If you have a question or a comment while we're on break, 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage will be right back.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Are you a savvy driver who uses BG44K? Or are you one of the millions of drivers who have been ripped off on some miracle gas mileage improver? Now, if you use BG44K, you know it works. And if you bought a miracle product, well, you know they don't work. Gas mileage is a function of vehicle design, and the things that control mileage can't be easily changed. But by using BG44K, you'll get the mileage your car was designed to deliver. How? Well, gasoline contains emissions-reducing additives that help the air but choke engines with mileage-robbing deposits. These deposits cause a slow, steady drop in fuel mileage. But using BG44K every 7,500 miles keeps your entire fuel system deposit-free and keeps your gas mileage at new car levels. BG44K is safe for all cars. BG44K helps maintain new car performance and new car fuel economy. So ask your repair professional for BG44K. To find a nearby professional, it's bgfindashop.com or 800-327-8883.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677.
All right, folks, we're talking to Mr. Rick Robinson of American High Performance in Lorton, Virginia. We're talking about supercharging in one of the projects they recently did on a Chevrolet Suburban. But before we go back to talking about that, Rick, let's talk to John in Tampa Bay, Florida, as an EcoBoost question. John, welcome to Goss's Garage.
Hi, Pat. It sure is a privilege to speak with you. I've been a long-time fan since you guys have been on the air.
Well, thank you.
Right from the beginning. So I definitely, whatever you tell me, I basically take it to the bank.
Well, appreciate that, sir.
Recently, my wife has had a 2-liter EcoBoost in her Escape, and I just recently bought a Mustang with EcoBoost. Very impressed with the power that the car puts out and the gas mileage for such a small engine. Recently, doing some studying about direct injection engines, I'm finding out about the carbon deposits that develop on the top of the valves. Speaking with my local Ford dealer, they said, well, if you put a catch can on it, which that's what a lot of people told me to do, totally voids the warranty. So now my question is, what is your take on it? Have you heard anything negatively about the EcoBoost engine as far as carbon deposit buildup on the 4 cylinders? I know the 6s do have problems.
All right. It has nothing to do with EcoBoost. It has to do with modern cars in general, and it has to do with low-tension piston rings. And what happens is that you get more oil that moves through the crankcase breather system, and that goes back into the intake, and then from the intake right onto the backs of the valves. And hot valves, you get deposits, right?
As well as through the PCB system. And that is more true of the boosted cars like the EcoBoost, because you tend to get higher crankcase pressures.
Right.
Same thing with the loose piston rings allow more blow-by into the crankcase. You get more back up in the intake. You can actually pull the intake open and you'll see oil pooled inside there. And that's why the catch cans are a great solution to that. I'm really surprised they would tell you that.
Yeah, that's a new one. I've never heard of a dealer telling anybody that before. Granted, if you put a catch can on, it's going to void the warranty on the 2 pieces of hose and the fittings where it connects into the intake, and $20 worth of odds and ends there, and that's it. But shouldn't void the warranty on anything else.
Wow. Yeah, that's not the way they put it to me. Basically voids the warranty. I've actually even been on some forums, Mustang forums, where people have done things to the EcoBoost, and the number one thing is the catch can, and they all said the same thing. So it's not only my local Ford dealer here in Tampa, but it sounds like it's nationwide that they're telling people do not do it. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm using top-tier fuel, which I know really doesn't help because it's spraying in the piston, not on top of the valve.
Right.
But still, I'm using that. And also, I've been told use a full synthetic, which there's less moisture in full synthetic oil. So,
well, moisture is not the problem. And as far as moisture content in oil, you just threw us a curve that
Yeah, different problem.
Yeah, for sure. As far as moisture in the oil, no, but not really. But this whole thing is oil getting back into the intake, and the only thing I know is a catch can, and I don't know about forums and stuff like that. So much of what we see on forums is bogus. So I don't know what to tell you there.
Well, at this point, rather than just and the one dealer I've just been dealing with for years here in Tampa, but I mean, it couldn't hurt to just make a phone call to Ford itself and ask them what their take is on it. They're very helpful if you call Ford.
Yeah.
And in Dearborn and say, hey, I have a question for you, and see what they have to say.
Yeah.
Whether it avoids the warranty. I hate to do it. I mean, mine, I have a certified pre-owned Mustang, and I got 100K on my engine, and I hate to see that thing be voided over a catch can.
Well, what kind of warranty do you have at 100,000 miles? Oh, you mean you've got a 100,000 mile warranty?
Yeah. When you buy a certified pre-owned Ford, they give you 7 years on 100K. Yeah, it's a heck of a deal.
Yeah,
so,
I understand that. So.
All right, but you haven't. I mean, in your shop, you haven't had any EcoBoost come in with bad deposits that you know of. Anyway.
Sure, we have.
Oh, you have?
Yes, we have all makes and models. Late model cars come in with deposits, and the first thing that we recommend is a catch can. Now, have I talked to Ford? No, I haven't talked to Ford. I have talked to GM, and. No, they say, it's going to void the warranty on the PCV components, but nothing else.
I could live with that.
Yeah.
I could definitely live with that. I mean, as long as it don't void the warranty on the whole engine. But
Well,
okay, I'm going to look into that.
The best thing is to call Ford and listen to it with your ears, and maybe they'll send you a note or something to clarify it.
Very good. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
All right.
Have you heard anything about voiding warranties with catch cans?
Not at all. Nobody's ever said anything about it. And I would certainly challenge the Ford warranty folks to tell me how a catch can cause damage to a motor.
Yeah.
It's there to help the motor. Now, the PCV system is part of the emission system, and of course, federal regulations say you cannot mess with an emission system at all, but I think even the EPA would say that's a little silly to say a catch can is going to cause kind of a problem.
Yeah, that's getting out there a ways. All right. Let's see. We have, what do we have? Rex from Woodbridge, Virginia. Hi, welcome to Goss's Garage.
Hi, Pat.
Yeah.
I was calling to ask questions about using top-tier gas. I hear there's more cleaning agents in it, or just stick to a premium type gas or something.
Well, does your car require premium?
My car's 08 Mercury Sable. I've heard from people that it's the same engine as in sister Lincoln like it.
Yeah, but it doesn't require premium fuel. So if you run premium fuel, that's not going to change anything. Premium has the same cleaning agents as 87, so you'd be better off running 87. Top tier has more cleaning agents, but it's not that much more, and you'd be better off to routinely use a product like BG44K, which will do 10 times what using top tier will do.
Because I had one can from you once a while back when you used to offer it.
Right.
And stuff, and it worked out good and stuff. But
Yeah.
I did notice since I bumped my car up to running the premium, it seems to run a little bit smoother.
Well, that in most cases is going to be in your mind that it feels smoother, because in reality, you take a car that has a computer that is programmed to the burning speed of 87 octane, which burns more rapidly and has more energy than a gallon of premium, which burns more slowly and has less energy in it. That just doesn't compute.
Now, people believe high octane means high power, and high octane means high resistance to detonation.
Yeah.
So as you said, it burns more slowly, and it doesn't cause detonation at high compression ratios.
So, yeah, there's so many myths about high octane fuel, and the reality of it is that it burns more slowly, so that you can have the spark arrive in the cylinder earlier, and because it expands in the cylinder more slowly, you got more time for piston movement before it slams down on the top of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yes, there certainly is a place for premium fuel, but I don't see where it makes sense in a regular fuel engine.
Right, and we did a whole show on that, right? So if you look back in Pat's archives, you'll see a show on octane.
Right. Gotta love octane. All right, let's take a quick break here. We'll be right back with more with Rick Robinson from American High Performance coming up on Goss's Garage.
Operators are standing by to take your call for Pat at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Think you'll get a deal buying a used car from an individual instead of a dealer? Possibly, but there's a good chance you'll get taken if you wind up dealing with a curbstoner. Curbstoners are low-life scum who buy cars with problems, cobble them together, roll back the miles, make them look good, and resell them. They usually claim the car belonged to a friend or relative, and there's a sad story about a death, financial woes, illness, or other tragedy. If you buy from one of these crooks, you'll probably get a great-looking car, but in poor mechanical or body condition at a slightly lower price. But you won't get a warranty or a good, reliable car. Curbstoner cars are often so bad they only have scrap value. There are Curbstoner cars all over the internet, in nearly every shopping center and sitting along the road. Total loss, flood cars are a Curbstoner favorite because there are tens of thousands of them and they're easy to disguise. So when buying off the street, question everything. When was the title issued? Is it in the seller's name? Does it show the seller's proper address? Is it from another state? Of course, always have a shop check any used car and get a Carfax vehicle history report before paying a dime. Curbstoners are crooks who will happily steal your money, so be really careful. I get lots of questions about BG products, many about specific products or services like, is BG44K really that good, or are BG transmission, cooling system, and power steering flushes actually necessary? But most popular of all, do I use BG products in my cars? Well, the answer to all of those questions is yes. A regular schedule of BG flushes and chemicals will deliver the longest possible life from all the lubricated and fuel delivery parts on your vehicles. And do I use BG products? You bet I do. I drive nice cars, and I drive a lot. Plus, my live radio and TV shows mean that my cars have to be absolutely reliable. A no start from dirty fuel injectors or a failed transmission just isn't acceptable in my life. Remember, deposits and dirty fluids ruin expensive parts. For reliability like I demand, visit one of the quality shops that sell BG products and perform BG services. To find a BG professional near you, bgfindashop.com.
Now, back to Goss's Garage with your host, Pat Goss.
844-885-4677. If you have a question for Rick Robinson or myself, give us a call, 844-885-4677. And remember that number can be used 24/7. You can leave us a message, we'll call you back, or we'll play your message on the air and answer your question and so on. 844-885-4677. Rick, we were talking with the last caller about, or the caller before the last one, about voiding warranties with a catch can. You said you may look into that with your contacts at Ford.
I will. I can't imagine, why they would contend that, unless it's just an issue with the emissions system. But it certainly, there's nothing that a catch can could do to cause damage to a motor. It's really there to help it, as opposed to harming it. And as we were discussing on the break, anytime you have a problem with a car, and the dealer wants to contend that some aftermarket part that you put on there voids the warranty, it is up to them to prove that part caused the damage to the engine.
Yeah.
So, I changed the exhaust headers on the car and the water pump fails, and they said, oh, well, you voided the warranty. I said, well, not so fast. Show me how it damaged the water pump. Can't happen.
You have to, they have to prove that it did cause the problem. You, as the vehicle owner, do not have to prove that it did not cause the problem.
Correct.
So, big difference there, folks. All right, Rick, we were talking turbocharging superchargers.
Versus supercharger. So we were talking about superchargers, and particularly the twin screw superchargers, and how they are producing boost all the time, and at low RPMs you can get significant amount of boost. Now that can have its drawback too. If you're throwing a full, 12, 13 pounds of boost, depending on where you've got your supercharger set, at a stock motor at 2,500 RPM, that's a lot of stress on pistons and rods. So you have to be careful with that, about how much boost you're putting on the motor at those low speeds. But you get really good low-end torque numbers out of that. And we'll provide the graphic to you of the dyno curve for this particular Suburban that we talked about, and you'll see that right at the very beginning, as soon as he hits the throttle, that torque line goes right to 400 foot-pounds of torque at the rear wheel, and is steady all the way across. Just a real nice flat torque curve.
Now, the difference here, of course, because the Supercharger is belt-driven and a turbo is exhaust-driven, the turbo has to spool up from exhaust gases moving through it before you get the boost.
That's true, and that's the drawback of the turbo systems. It's been an issue for a long, long time. We've all heard about turbo lag, and because it's driven by a little turbine motor and not belt-driven off of the Supercharger, that takes time for the exhaust velocity to build up once you hit the throttle and start throwing more air in there and pushing more exhaust out. And for it to build the RPMs up in the compressor side to generate the kind of compression that you need.
But in either case, the amount of boost that you're going to apply needs to be regulated, because too much boost, whether it's turbo or supercharged, things are going to break no matter which you have.
Right. Superchargers have bypass valves in them, and it just bypasses the compressed air from inside the intake back around and into the intake tube. So it's kind of recirculating through the intake system, and that's how they regulate the boost on those. It's also driven by pulley size. You can change pulley sizes and increase the amount of boost that the motor that the Supercharger will generate. Turbos, on the other hand, because they're exhaust driven, if you just continued to apply exhaust to it as the RPM and the power of the engine increased, it would just keep spinning faster and faster and faster. So it has what's called a wastegate that's set at a given point to relieve that pressure when you reach the boost level that you're looking for. So there's a feedback loop from the manifold sensing how much boost is there, and causing the wastegate to open up and bypass exhaust gas, and that's how you regulate boost on a turbo.
Now, the other thing that I've noticed is that there are all kinds of these really dirt cheap turbo kits out there. These teeny little turbos, and they've got a bunch of J-bends and stuff, pipes that come with them and so on. You cut and fabricate and so on. They're cheap, and they're cheap.
That's right. That old adage, you get what you pay for, still works today. And, I have not heard stories of these things blowing up and damaging people's cars, but they are, cheap Chinese-made turbos, and there's always the potential for that. And remember that thing is right there in the intake flow. So if that turbine impeller comes apart, all those pieces are going to go right down the intake and right into your motor. And they turn at extremely high RPMs. 25, 30,000 RPM is not unusual at all in a turbo, even higher. So you want a good quality product when you're going to have something that's spinning that fast and it's right there in the intake to your motor.
Well, the other thing that should play into this, a turbo coming apart these days, because we no longer have EGR and so on in the classic sense of exhaust gas recirculation valves. They now use valve overlap to get exhaust back into the cylinders to cool what's going on in the cylinders and so on. An impeller comes apart, that overlap is going to suck it right straight back into the exhaust port, and then you got a mess on your hands.
Yes, it can. It can come in from both sides. But we talked about turbo lag, so you'll see it right on the dyno graph. That'll start off just very slowly building boost and building power in the motor. And at that point where the speed in the turbine catches up and it really starts to push some air, you feel that turbo come in. You'll feel it in the seat of your pants. You'll see it on the dyno screen. You get a very sharp rise at that point in power. That also can catch some drivers by surprise. It also can cause the the wheels to break loose if you don't have good traction in your tires at that point, if you hadn't heated the tires up. So there's pros and cons on both sides. Turbos, because they spin much faster than superchargers do. Superchargers are limited by the RPMs of the motor. Turbos are not. They typically can hit higher peak boost than the superchargers will, but it's going to take you a little longer to get there.
All right, now, vehicle manufacturers are now using progressive turbos, actually 2 turbos built into one housing, so you've got a smaller one that picks up the boost at lower RPM, and that feeds a bigger one, and so on. Are things like that available in the aftermarket?
They are. Not a lot of the progressive kits, but what you also see is that a lot of the cars, like the Mustang that the gentleman called about, like the V6 EcoBoost that Ford has, have 2 small turbos on. They're twin turbo setups. Everybody likes that name. I got a twin turbo. But it's 2 smaller turbos instead of 1 bigger one, because those small ones will spin up faster. They have less inertia in them, and they'll spin up faster than the one big one will, and you'll get that better low-end response.
But any way you go about it, if you want really good performance and you don't want turbo lag and so on, you're going to have to step up, and probably either way you go about it, it's going to cost about the same amount of money.
Turbo systems actually tend to be a little more expensive than supercharger systems. Supercharger systems are pretty fixed in their design. You buy the whole thing, it bolts right onto your engine, and you're ready to go. Turbocharger kits, unless you find somebody that's making one specifically for your vehicle with everything all welded together and ready to bolt on, you're going to get what you talked about on those cheap eBay kits. It's a box full of pipe. And, say, here you go. Good luck with this. And you got to figure it all out yourself. So there's a lot more work involved in building a turbo system than there is in a supercharger system. Superchargers typically are made specifically for that car. They have a different model for every car out there, and they bolt right on.
All right, now, one of the things, we have a couple of cars that come in here, and I can't get my head around it. One of them's a Mustang, and it has twin turbos, but they're mounted at the rear bumper. Turbos, part of what they rely on is heat, and the hotter the exhaust gas, the better they work, and so on. So you move it all the way to the back, so that means that you've got all this cooling effect, which is going to cool down the exhaust before it gets there. And there has to be, you're going back and then you're going forward, there's a certain amount of resistance in moving air through all of that pipe. How do it work?
Absolutely. We've seen a number of those.
I mean, it looks cool.
And we talked about the velocity of the exhaust gas coming out of the motor. It's really the heat, the energy and the heat of the exhaust that is driving that turbine.
Right.
So pushing it through 12 feet of pipe all the way to the back bumper of the car allows you for a lot of heat loss. Your only alternative is to use insulating wrap and wrap that entire thing all the way back, which is a big job. Also tends to collect moisture and end up deteriorating the pipe as well. And then you have to, once you get that turbo spun up and now you're pushing this compressed air back forward, it's got a lot of pipe to go through as it moves forward too. And so there's going to be pressure losses as that air tries to find its way all the way back up to the intake.
I would think there would be more propensity toward turbo lag too, because you've got hit the throttle and all this air's got to move back, and then it's compressed and got to move forward. And
absolutely.
So, but I have to admit, like I say, they raise one of those up in the air and it looks impressive. You got miles of pipe under there and all shiny and everything, and you fire it up, and to hear the turbos whining back there by the rear bumper. It sounds really, really neat, but it just doesn't seem like a practical application to me.
The other factor is because the turbo's back there, the intake is back there too. So now you got the intake back in probably the dirtiest area of the car, because all of the dirt that's being kicked up by the wheels and is coming up under the car, rain, water, all of those contaminants are all over that turbo back there, and propensity for sucking some of that in if you don't have a good intake set up and a good filtration system.
Real cool, but not so good.
Not real practical, no. The only thing it prevents is there's always real estate issues in the engine compartment, particularly in today's cars. You open the hood and you couldn't throw a penny in there and hope to ever see it again.
Right.
So trying to cram all of this stuff up into the engine compartment is always a challenge. Plus, turbos give off a lot of heat because you've got all this exhaust pipe running around under there. So you build up a lot more heat under the hood. Putting it back there kind of eliminates those issues, but at the same time eliminates a lot of the performance of the turbo as well.
Gotcha. All right, we need to take one more break here. We'll be right back on Goss's Garage.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Life changes at a ferocious pace these days, especially when it comes to maintaining our cars. For example, automatic transmissions now need regular fluid flushes. Transmission fluid breaks down with use, and although it may look fine, its additives wear out and it can no longer properly protect bands, clutches, seals, and other hugely expensive parts inside your transmission. Bottom line, more wear and a shorter transmission life. Now you can significantly extend transmission life with a BG transmission flush every 24 to 30,000 miles or 2 years. BG makes the best transmission flush machine I've ever tested. It renews all of the fluid in your transmission, not just a small part of it. The BG transmission flush machine is safe, too, because it uses the natural circulation of the transmission. Your transmission will work better and last longer. As with everything BG offers, this is a superior service. For more information, go to bgprod.com or bgfindashop.com. You probably don't think about it, but if you double the life of your car, your fixed expenses per mile will drop 50%. But how can you double the life of a car? Well, that's easy. Simply use BG products and flushes for your routine maintenance. I'll bet you know someone whose cars last a lot longer than yours, plus they never seem to have problems. Now you can enjoy those great savings too. Simply enroll in the BG Protection Plan, and BG will guarantee covered parts for as long as you own your car, in writing. With the BG Protection Plan, long after your car is paid off, you'll still have years of warranty left. Think about it. No payments and no worries about major repair bills. That's amazing. It's almost too good to be true because the BG Protection Plan is also absolutely free. My cars are covered by the BG Protection Plan. Yours should be too. For details, bgprod.com or 800-327-8883.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. And now, Pat Goss.
All right, folks, we're talking to Rick Robinson from American High Performance in Lorton, Virginia. Rick, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do it?
Well, they can find us on the web two ways. One through AmericanHighPerformance.com, which is our regular website. AmericanHighPerformance.biz is our online web store. And there's links between the two of them on both.
Okay. All right. Now, back to this Suburban that you supercharged. What else did you do to it? Did you do more than just the supercharger, do exhaust, or?
Yes, we did long tube headers, aftermarket converters, of course, that are required with that setup, and a performance exhaust as well. The long tube headers, particularly in supercharged cars, always help. You'll get a good power gain with the stock headers, but you really need to open that exhaust up to get all that air out. We've pushed all this air in, made all this power, we got to get it out, and the long tube headers really help that.
Now, don't the long tube headers also change the resonant frequency inside the headers as far as the scavenging effect?
They do. The whole purpose of the longer tubes is to try to build that velocity in those tubes in order to continue to scavenge the exhaust out of the intake while the exhaust valve is open. So even after it gets that initial blast coming on the opening of the exhaust valve into the header, as it continues to flow, it's pulling the rest of the exhaust with it as it goes down the tube. The collectors are designed specifically to try to get those impulses in the right order so they don't interfere with each other and cause back pressure. So it's although it just looks like tubes and headers, it's a pretty scientific design to control the flow of gas in those tubes.
Okay, now, when you got all done with this, you said it's probably an 8-second car when it's stock. What approximately did you wind up with?
We didn't get a chance to get it out on the road and do any 0 to 60 tests with it, but based on our experience with some earlier Suburbans, little different motor, different setup on that one, but I would expect to see somewhere in the 6.5 to 7 second range in terms of the improvement in 0 to 60 in particular.
Which, interesting thing, that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in the field, it's an enormous difference.
It is. Yeah, when you're trying to get onto the freeway at, in 65, 70 mile an hour traffic, that makes a huge difference.
Now, you have some past experience with these big GM SUVs.
We did. We've worked on them quite often over the years, but we did have a customer come in who worked for the U.S. Marshal Service, and he had convinced his superiors to run a test on one of these because they do a lot of escort service for the dignitaries around Washington, D.C. here. And they found that when they got in trouble and they had to get out of that area, the Cadillacs that were typically carrying the dignitaries would just walk off and leave them. And
now, the Cadillac has a different engine.
Right. And even though it's a heavy beast too, it would outrun that Suburban by a long shot. And so they brought this one to us. Again, we went with the Whipple Supercharger to get that low-end grunt coming off of, 30 mile an hour cruise through town. And we got, at that point, those Suburbans, this was early mid 2000 era, were running that 5.3 liter engine. So, so they were
kind
real
of doggy.
Dogs. They were real dogs. And their 0 to 60 times were up around 12 to 13 seconds. They were pretty slow. We got this one down well below 10 seconds, and it performed much better. So much better that out on their test course, they were having a little difficulty with control of the vehicle. So they came back. We upgraded the brakes, we upgraded the wheels and the tires. There wasn't a lot we could do with the suspension without some really major modifications to it. So what we did is we used a tire with a little different offset and a wider wheel and tire to kick that tire out a little further. Gave it a pretty cool, aggressive look because you could see the tire sticking out from the side of the Suburban. But it also increased the track width of the vehicle and gave it more stability.
Now, I wonder if they use the training course that's right up the road from us here in Beltsville.
I'm not sure which one they used, whether it was one down at Quantico or that one. One of the two.
Got quite a setup up the road here a ways.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so there's a lot more to this than just bolting on parts. I guess if you really want to gain performance, though, and you don't have a lot of money to spend. Probably the best way to do it, and I guess you'd get 30 or 40% increase, is to go online and buy an electric supercharger. $49.
Absolutely. Put an electric fan in your intake manifold, and that'll. It might keep your engine a little cooler. I don't know.
Well, I would think it would slow down
Absolutely.
movement of air into the engine instead of boosting anything. You'd have a negative there.
Yeah, running wide open, even with a carbureted car, you're pulling anywhere from 600 to 700 cubic feet per minute in the typical performance car. I don't know of too many 3-inch electric fans that can push 600 cubic feet of air per minute.
Probably more like 3 or 4 cubic feet a minute, I would think.
But it's funny, like you said with the gentleman about octane, it's all in the mind of the user, and people buy these thinking that it will improve performance, and by God, they absolutely think it does. They swear that they feel better performance out of it.
Yeah, we see that all the time. People come in, oh, I did this, and it drove so much better. Well, we all, in the business, we all know that is just pure hogwash, can't work, defies the laws of physics, and, but psychosomatics, I guess.
Right. Yeah, the other one we've talked about is this little electronic box that say all you got to do is just plug this right into the wiring harness on your car, instantly pick up 100 horsepower. They make outlandish claims, and you're going to get 75 miles per gallon too, which is ridiculous. What that does is it modifies the signal coming out of the inlet air temperature. We talked about detonation earlier. Detonation is very sensitive to inlet air temperature. As that temperature goes up, that charged air in the cylinder, as it comes up to full compression, is hotter, much more of a tendency to detonate. So the computer senses that temperature signal, starts pulling back on ignition to try to prevent detonation and protect your motor. So you just took that away. So yeah, you've got more advance and a little more power as you accelerate, but you're also putting your motor at risk, and eventually it's going to break.
Well, there's just small holes in the tops of the pistons.
That's right.
Nothing to get excited about.
Then you're really going to need that catch can.
Now, another thing that I see miracle claims for, spark plugs. Now, I understand that if we take a crappy set of spark plugs out and put any kind of spark plugs in, we're going to get better performance. But essentially, when you change a spark plug on a modified engine or something, you're doing it not because it's going to improve performance significantly, but it's going to maintain performance and not break down under extremes.
Absolutely. I mean, what's a spark plug there to do? It's there to fire the charge, right? And if it doesn't fire, you're not going to be making any power. When we put supercharger kits on, we're effectively raising the compression ratio of that motor. So it might have been a 9-to-1 engine to begin with. We throw 15 pounds of boost at it, and now we've got an engine that's creating 13, 14 to 1 compression, because we've just shoved that much more air in there to compress. When we do that, we go to a colder range spark plug, because as I compress all of that air, it gets much hotter. And that spark plug has to be able to operate in that much higher temperature charge. So you go to a colder plug to perform there. We also tighten up the gap on the spark plugs quite a bit. A lot of today's plugs will run a 50 thousandths gap on them. We get it down to about 30, 32 to make sure that we get a good fire out of that thing.
Yeah, but as far as putting in a set of spark plugs and gaining 50 horsepower, ain't going to happen.
Only if you lost it to begin with, because the spark plugs were so gummed up that they wouldn't fire.
Yeah.
You might get it back, but you're not going to make it.
Well, the other thing that amazes me is you see the ads for spark plugs. They may have a disc, or they may have a whole bunch of electrodes and so on. And although some of those things might have an advantage under certain circumstances, the reality of electricity is that it always takes the path of least resistance. So you don't get 100 different sparks around this circle. It takes the path of least resistance. So you get a spark.
Right. I think all they're trying to do there is just guarantee that at some point around the circle of that electrode, it's going to fire.
Right.
The other thing I forgot to mention was that, again, because we're shoving all this here and there and increasing the compression ratio, the pressures are much higher in the cylinder as it reaches top dead center and that spark plug fires. And dense air is actually less conductive than thinner air. And it's much harder for that spark to jump across that gap in that dense air. So again, we get that gap down tight to make sure that it's going to fire.
Well, it comes down to knowing what you're doing as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are other myths out there about, we can put a high output coil on a car and so on. Stock car, not going to change a thing.
No.
Because, again, spark plugs don't use the amount of electricity that's made available to them. They only use the amount of electricity that is required to bridge the gap.
That's right. Your engine was designed to fire every time, under its given configuration as it came out of the factory, and it will as long as you maintain everything properly. Now, when we modify that, and again, when we start raising the compression ratios and raising the temperatures in the cylinder, that's where it starts requiring a little more power to make sure that that plug fires every time. And that's where things like the spark boosters come into play to raise the voltage level coming out of that coil to guarantee that I get a good spark.
All right. Now, when it comes to boost for the average engine that you're going to build these days, how far can you go on average before you have to start looking toward modifying the engine internally?
All depends on you as the driver and how you drive the car. If you are using this like the Suburban owner will, just to get me onto the freeway faster and get me out of harm's way faster, then you're rarely pushing it to its limits, and it's going to be fine. We both know a lot of car owners with supercharged cars that drive them for years and never have a problem with them. If you take it to the racetrack every weekend and you're just hammering on it all the time, obviously you're putting a lot more stress on the motor, and eventually it's going to break. Our little race car it had a 351 Windsor motor in it, stock bottom end, Edelbrock top end, put about 400 foot-pounds of torque to the wheel, which is pretty good for a 351. So we were pushing it, and the car lived every day of its life quarter mile at a time. That's all it did was down the quarter mile, but it did it for 4 years straight before it finally gave up. But eventually it did, because we're really punishing the thing. And if you're pushing a supercharged engine hard all the time, and it wasn't built originally to be a supercharged engine, it's eventually going to break.
All right, but is there a magic number as far as PSI on boost before you say, hey, just don't go any farther for normal driving?
Depending on the motor. Now, some of today's motors, like the LS3s, like the Coyote motors, they're built much stronger than the earlier motors were. And they will take more boost and more punishment than the earlier motors will. But if you've got one of the earlier LS1 350s, you go much past 10 PSI, you're starting to get in the danger zone, as the song goes. And those chances are that, again, if you're pushing it hard a lot, it's going to give up sooner.
I was reading some specs on Pontiac had some Trans Ams that they built that were turbocharged. And back in the day, they were considered to be pretty radical. And I was reading the specs, and the boost was, I think, 4.5 PSI. I mean, which by today's standard, some of this factory stuff is running over 20, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly in the turbo applications.
Yeah.
The small 4-cylinders where you're really trying to get a lot of power out of a small package. Vortec was one of the pioneers in the supercharging, aftermarket supercharging business. And they started with the Fox Body Mustangs. And the basic kit that you got from Vortec was about 4.5 to 5 PSI. Safe enough to put on that stock 302 and be happy for a good long while. But like you say, today everybody wants those horsepower numbers. Everybody wants 1,000 horsepower. It takes a really well-designed machine to get to 1,000 horsepower. I can get a stock LS3 or a stock Coyote or a stock Terminator motor to 1,000 horsepower. I guarantee it's not going to last very long.
Yeah, so if you really want all of this to hold together and be reliable and everything, you got to use a little common sense and restraint.
Absolutely. It's got to. We've talked about total engineering package before. It's got to be engineered to be able to take that kind of power. Otherwise, something's going to break. And that's not only true of the engine. It's from there all the way back to the wheel.
Gotcha. Well, Rick, we have done it again. One more time, can you give us contact information, please?
AmericanHighPerformance.com and AmericanHighPerformance.biz out on the web. And you can reach us by phone at 703-339-7412.
And you're located right off of 95 or 66?
95.
95.
Right on I-95. You can see us from the freeway.
Ooh, Lorton, Virginia.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Steve McMillan, George Stockton, and Chris DePamphilis for producing today's show. And, of course, for Rick Robinson, thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Drive gently, everybody.